Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a review of something you may have been noticing on my table as a part of doing my lens reviews, and that is the first ever tablet from Doogee that I reviewed. Now, I have reviewed some of their rugged smartphones in the past, but I was interested when they said that they also did tablets because there's a lot of strengths that Doogee does have, and I was curious to see how they applied to the tablet space. So this is the Doogee T30 Pro tablet, and I'm going to be diving into different aspects of performance here today. Just to give you a little bit of context, I'm kind of putting this up against something really demanding in that my typical tablet is the most recent iPad Pro 11-inch. And I also have the Apple Magic Keyboard that I use that on. All told, this is a combination that would cost around $1,200 US, whereas the Doogee T30 that I've put up against it right now, but you can often get it bundled with the keyboard in place, and it's adding up to a grand total of around $300 US. So maybe not a fair comparison in some ways, but at the same time, they're calling it Pro, they're competing in this space, and so I'm going to be using that as a comparison point here today. So obviously the first jumping off point is when it comes to value, because I noted that my Magic Keyboard that I use with my iPad, it cost only about $30 less than the whole Doogee bundle here. And so that obviously makes it a really strong value. My surprising conclusion is that I could live with the T30 as my tablet, and that's a huge win for such an inexpensive device. Now, I actually did the whole text review on the Doogee T30 Pro and using its own keyboard to type and to set everything up, and so if you want to check that out, that is linked in the description down below. Let's start by talking about screen performance. The Doogee T30 Pro sports an 11-inch 2.5K display that is nice and bright. The tablet dimensions are just a little bit different in terms of format from my iPad. I measured the T30 Pro as being about 10 inches in height, 254 millimeters by 6.5 inches in width, or 165 millimeters. About 85% of that is screen, making the bezel pretty small, but not quite as small as what is the case on my iPad. My iPad has a height of 9.74 inches or 247.6 millimeters and a width of right over 7 inches, 7.02 inches or 178.5 millimeters. And so fairly an equal, obviously, amount of screen size in terms of the diagonal, but they are set up just a little bit differently. One area where iPad is the obvious winner is the fact that it is really thin by comparison. It's 5.9 millimeters compared to 7.6 millimeters for the T30. It is also lighter. It weighs in at 473 grams versus 543 grams for the T30. I will note, however, that holding them in hand, the T30 still feels very slim and light. It doesn't actually feel radically different. Now, typical 2.5K resolution is 2560 by 1440, but the T30 is just a little bit higher. It's 2560 by 1600. The other core screen statistics are also quite good, with 350 nits of peak brightness, delivers 374 pixels per inch, and 16 million colors in the spectrum of color reproduction. Bottom line, the screen really looks great. Also helping the screen when it comes to the media viewing is that it does have Widevine L1 support. And if you're not familiar with what that means, that is basically the highest level of DRM protection that is achievable within a media device by current standards. And that means that all of the video decryption and processing can take place within the trusted execution environment, the TEE, right in the device. Now, that means nothing to you, but this will mean something to you, and that is that Widevine L1 certified devices, they are allowed by the streaming services to play videos back at the highest resolution possible, which means that your media, your movies, your shows are going to look great, whereas a device that didn't have that kind of support would have to display them at a lower resolution level. I do have a few critiques of the screen performance. The first is that the viewing angle is definitely far more limited than what I have on my iPad. I typically spend every morning reading the news, studying my Bible, using a Bible app, and so I have a really kind of familiar process that I've done for many years using a tablet for that setting. And I definitely found that depending on how it's sitting, either the bottom or the top of the screen, depending on the tilt, looks darker than the other due to that viewing angle issue. And also can be a little bit of an issue if you're off center from the screen and looking at media content. I also found that the adaptive brightness, it does have adaptive brightness, but it doesn't work as well as on my iPad. Frankly, I just kind of forget about the fact that a tablet screen needs to be adjusted in varying lighting conditions because iPad is so good at that, whereas it's not nearly as good on the T30. I found that a lot of times I had to make a manual adjustment because the natural adjustment, however the sensor is working, it tends to leave things a little bit dim for my taste. My final critique of the screen is not really about the screen per se, but kind of a general perspective. It's true of iPad and a lot of other tablets, and that is that the material of the screen is far too reflective. So that makes it difficult to use outside. It can get bright enough to use outside, but you're going to have issues with reflection, or if you're sitting in a room with a window right behind you, it definitely makes viewing the screen more of a challenge. On the bright side, it does have a blue light certification, meaning that the screen is easier on the eyes and it's less disruptive to sleep cycles, which is obviously a welcome feature. The screen is obviously one of the most important aspects of any tablet, and by and large, particularly for a device at this price point, Doogee is really delivering a premium product at a discount price. I think that most people are going to be quite happy with the screen performance. Probably less likely to be happy with the audio performance, particularly if you're using the standard of something like iPad. According to Doogee, the T30 Pro conforms to high-resolution audio standards that are defined by the Japan Audio Association, and it does have quad speakers, 2 on each side, just like my iPad Pro. However, it doesn't have near as good of sound quality. It doesn't have a whole lot of low end for one, so it sounds a little bit tinny by comparison. I also felt like the spatial separation was not all that great. This is, again, an area where the iPad really exceeds giving you a sound stage that's quite wide for a device like this, and with the sound being quite engaging of what comes off of it. And the T30 Pro, just as I said, kind of sounds tinny by comparison without as much spatial separation. I also feel like both this and then the Doogee S100 rugged smartphone that I'm also reviewing right now, it feels like they're pumping in some additional artificial reverb into audio sound to give it the impression of presence, but particularly if you're listening to something live, it just sounds kind of echoey by comparison. So you're going to be better served by either connecting headphones or speakers via either Bluetooth, or there is a 3.5mm headphone jack on the bottom of the tablet, and that is going to give you better performance. Now, an area that is a huge strength for Doogee is the fact that it's an area where Apple is terrible, and that is the fact that Apple continues to get away with charging massive amounts for additional storage. An iPad Pro 11-inch like mine starts at about $799 for a Wi-Fi only configuration and 128 gigabyte of internal storage. So if you want to jump up to 256 gigabyte, that's another $100. If you want to go up to 512, that's another $100. You want wireless mobility and the ability to drop a SIM card in there, that you can add another $200 to these prices. If you want to add more storage after the fact, well, you can pretty much forget about it. It's just not going to happen. By comparison, the T30 Pro comes with 256 gigabyte of internal storage, but it's designed to where you can easily expand it up to 2 terabytes via micro SD. And there's a slot for that. And it's not hard to get a 1 terabyte micro SD card for under $100. And so that's obviously a huge advantage. The T30 actually comes with dual SIM slots. Other connectivity specs are very good. It has 4 different satellite positioning options, including GPS, Galileo, Beidou, and GLONASS. Wireless specs include an 802.11 ABG AC dual band setup. Charging and communication here comes via a USB-C port. You can attach other accessories like a mouse via the USB-C port or create a direct connection to a computer. It also has electronic contacts, just like my iPad does, that allows the tablet to easily dock into the keyboard case and to transfer both power and data directly. And so that means that the keyboard actually runs off the battery of the T30 Pro, meaning that the keyboard does not require a separate power source, which also means you're never going to go and grab the keyboard after having not used it for a while and need to type on only to realize that the battery has gone dead. And so this is the exact same way that things run with the Magic Keyboard on my iPad, and it is a great way of doing things. It's a really nice keyboard to type on. The worst thing about it is the fact that the kickstand integration is really not great. There is no hinge there, which I've been accustomed to on my recent keyboards. And so unless you kind of lean something against it or you're resting it on a little bit more of a rough surface where it can grab, expect it to fall on you multiple times during an extended work session. And if you're on a slick surface, it's even worse. It kind of will slowly slide out as you're hammering away with key strikes until it starts to collapse. And so I do miss the hinge, and so it helps to put something a little rougher underneath. Now, the Doogee T30 Pro is an Android 13 tablet, and overall it's a really snappy performer. It is running in the Helio G99 octa-core processor, and so it's got 2 Cortex A75 processors and then 6 Cortex A55 processors that are running. The cores are running at 2.2 gigahertz, and this is all built on 6 nanometer design, and so it's efficient along with having good performance. You've also got the potential for up to 15 gig of RAM here. So there is 8 gig of DDR4X RAM natively there, and then you have the option of creating up to 7 gig of an extended or a virtual RAM that you can set up in the dashboard. And of course, with having lots of storage space, it's easy to do that and not miss that all that much. So it gives you just that little extra bit of boost. Obviously, I'm really accustomed to working on what is one of the most powerful tablet options that's currently on the market. And frankly, I didn't really notice a big difference when using the Doogee. Apps open quickly. Using the normal apps that I do as a part of my workflow, they felt basically identical to running them on my iPad Pro. I'm not a big tablet gamer per se, but I did test a number of games, including Call of Duty, Oceanhorn, Angry Birds, things like that. Call of Duty allowed me to run things at high resolution. I didn't notice any kind of lag-related things. On other games that were maybe a little less demanding, I just found that everything ran perfectly. Colors were nice and bright. The screen touch was responsive for gaming input. On a side note, I really didn't enjoy operating Call of Duty, trying to use my thumbs for moving around. I'm just not familiar with that input. But obviously, that's just kind of par for the course unless you're actually attaching a gaming controller. More importantly to me is I was able to run my office and productivity apps without any kind of issue. Video streaming type programs for conferences ran excellent. There seemed to be plenty of power under the hood to do what I wanted here. There's also a ton of power here when it comes to the battery life. There is a huge 8,580 mAh battery pack. The battery life is great. In more moderate type use, that's kind of my typical morning browsing, some media, things like that. I ran it for 5 days and showed 32% battery that was left. And that was without powering down the tablet in between, just leaving it on standby. So on light use, it's going to last you a good week before you need to recharge it. By the way, both the included cover here and then the keyboard cover, they're both smart, and so you can close the cover to just power down the screen. So all of that is nice and simple. Yesterday, when I was working on the main review, I had a very long travel day, over 13 hours, and I used the tablet really heavy throughout the day. That included browsing, games, productivity, working on the article review. And after a long day of working on it, it still showed 48% battery life. And so that's really, really excellent. And so if you're doing like productivity, this is a really great notebook type replacement because of both the price and then the longevity of the battery life, which is something you're just not going to get at that kind of price point. Now, when it comes to the cameras here, the main camera is a 20 megapixel Sony branded lens. There's also an 8 megapixel front facing camera. Video looks fine, though I find, as usual, the Doogee tends to just over sharpen things too much for my taste to try to make everything look crisp, but it's overdone. Now, this isn't a big deal to me because I don't actually use a tablet to take photos. What I will use, however, is the camera for video conferencing, for meetings and things like that. And fortunately, that all works really well. In fact, the actual camera here is center mounted in the screen, which is much handier for actually making eye contact with your subject instead of being off to the side as it is on iPad. And so I really appreciate that. I've been able to do a number of video conferences, even with corporations, and just using the built-in stuff, built-in camera, built-in microphone, and I could both hear and be heard, see and be seen just fine. So no issues there, so I appreciate that. As we start to wrap things up, I will note that there is a very nice aluminum chassis on this. There's 3 different color choices. There's space gray, mint green, and ice blue. I'm using just the space gray, and it has a nice, clean, modern design. One thing I did appreciate is there on the right side of the back, there is a texture variation that makes the tablet a little easier to hold and grip if you're just holding the bare tablet. It did come bundled with a screen protector, which is obviously very handy to have. The smart cover. There's a scaled down, simpler, less active stylus that is included in the package. There's also an included charge brick, though I will note that Doogee sent me the European spec, so it hasn't done me a lot of good. Fortunately, I have a lot of ways of charging this. It will charge at an 18-watt kind of fast charge pace, and so you can charge the complete battery in about 2 hours, which is really not bad at all. There's also the little tool to allow you to pop open the nano SIM slots or to install the micro SD card. Now, I will note that the accessory market for an off-brand tablet like this is obviously nothing like the aftermarket is for Apple type products, just because of the wide availability of Apple products. There are some things out there, and most importantly to me, it's not hard to find on Amazon replacement screen protectors for the future to keep everything safe here. In conclusion, my biggest takeaway is, as mentioned in the beginning, is that I could live with this as my tablet. Now, if cost were no object, I would choose what I already have. There's just, Apple does some of the fine details really well. But I also realistically look at the fact that you could basically get about 4 of these Doogee T30 Pro tablets for the price of just one of the current iPad that I have. This is a tablet that has a lot to offer if you're on a budget, and other than the little criticisms that I've pointed out along the way in this review, there's a whole lot that I like about it, and I suspect that you will enjoy it as well. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you want to read through my review, you can check the description down below. There are some buying links there as well. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.